Fresh meat.
Have you ever hated someone? Truly hated someone? Do you know what it's like to be swallowed by anger? To fantasize and wish the worst possible punishments on another living being over and over and over again? If you have, I'm sorry. 2 years ago, my son was taken from me. He was the light of my life. I remember even now how tightly he held my thumb in his little hand when I first held him. His first steps as he walked into my arms from across the kitchen with those big brown eyes and that heart-melting smile. He used to drool on my chest when he slept, and even though he ruined every shirt I had, as I watched his little chest rise and fall, I loved him more than I ever thought possible. His mother Elizabeth, my Lizzie, was over the moon when she saw him. If you think I loved him, you should have seen her. There's nothing in the world stronger or more beautiful than a mother's love. We named him Daniel after Lizzie's father. You should have seen how he cried when we told him. It was that first year hit us harder than most. You underestimate how much money it takes to raise another person. And when doctor visits and babysitting fees start to stack up, you realize just how expensive existing is. On top of bills and necessities, Lizzie had a tough time recovering. Postpartum depression swallowed her whole. It's the stillness, the complete absence of light in a loved one's eyes as they fight that mental hell that kills you. It's knowing that they're right there, yet a whole world away, suffering silently. It's the quiet blaming you put on yourself for any little thing you do that you think threw them there. It's the slow resentment that builds and the guilt that eats at you, because you know deep down it's not their fault. Lizzie was the strongest person I'd ever known, and although she would peak out from then on, she never fully recovered. She was thrown in a hole too deep and too dark to climb out of, so she tried as best as she could to live in that darkness and make that hole her new normal. When her maternity leave ended, we had to leave him in daycare. We were nervous wrecks without him. I couldn't exactly keep him with me while I worked construction on the sites, and I doubt Lizzie's bosses would have been thrilled to have him manning the front desk with her, although it would have been adorable. Danny was a trooper, friendliest little boy alive. Although he couldn't talk too well, he was more than happy to tell us about all of his adventures stomping around town on daycare trips. He loved the park especially. After he was done on the playground, he'd feed the ducks and then sit to eat right there with them. He even made us pack a separate lunch just for his favorite duck on park days. Danny loved that park. I think he knew that too. I think that's why he let us find him there. I had gotten the call around lunchtime that he was missing. I'd called Lizzie, and she nearly had a breakdown on the phone. My supervisor tried stopping me, but when I explained to him what had happened, he let me go. I found out later that he had gotten together a few of the guys to help with the search party. It was 16 hours long before we got the news. The police had found him, stuffed in a ditch hidden behind the pond. They had to call in animal services to retrieve the body. The problem was that whenever someone got too close, the ducks would charge to protect him. We couldn't bury him until half a week later, once his body was no longer deemed evidence. Then Lizzie's suicide followed shortly after. When they got the guy, I pushed for the death penalty. The coroners had said it was as if his body had been scrubbed clean before he was dumped. The lack of sufficient DNA evidence to charge him with anything else, coupled with the fact he was a first-time offender, meant the best we could get was 25 to life. I was beyond anger. He'd get to spend the rest of his miserable life being pampered in a cell being fed 3 meals a day while I had to pick up the pieces as I buried my wife and child. I had begged God for justice, for that son of a bitch to get what he deserved. But justice never came. When I heard he was out on bond, I became obsessed. I felt myself going mad every day that bastard was allowed to breathe another lungful of air. Even though I was still living and breathing, he killed us both the day he took my Daniel. I died the night I picked my son up out of that hole, as if he were a piece of trash tossed in the bushes. When the lawyers turned their backs on me, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The criminal justice system was nothing more than a circus act, and I was a monkey dancing to its beat. I took what little I had left over from the lawyer fees and bought a revolver and box of bullets. I only needed 2, one for him and one for me. The night before I did it, I went to church one last time, drunker than I'd ever been. I walked into that warmly lit temple and let the Lord have it. I had prayed for his death day after day, week after week, but every time I did, God failed to deliver. As I sat on that pew and sipped that bottle dry, I told him that if he couldn't deliver me peace, then I'd find it from the devil. As I drunkenly trudged through that cold night, bitter and angry, I heard it. I heard the voice of a woman calling my name. I looked around, but I couldn't spot anyone. Still, I heard it clear as day. It followed me every step of the way home, and that night, she visited me. I had been having the same nightmare over and over again since it had happened. Reliving that stomach-turning moment, I walked across those bushes to find my little boy's face down in the mud. That night, however, was different. That night, I was reliving the first time I had ever laid eyes on my sweet little Danny. I felt the soft pressure as his little hand took hold of my finger and felt that same happiness wash over me. For the briefest of moments, I knew happiness again. I was so enveloped in that warmth that I didn't feel her watching me. "He's adorable," she said softly. She was dressed like the nurse that had delivered my Danny. But her eyes were black as coals. I was too shocked to say anything. In an instant, fear had gripped me tight. "I heard your prayers," she continued, gently placing a finger in front of Danny. "I'm afraid he doesn't work that way." I heard Danny giggle as he let go of my thumb and grabbed her index finger. When I finally regained my composure, all I could ask was, "Who are you?" "I'm someone who can help," she spoke, offering a gentle smile. "I was like you once too. Not exactly for me, it was my daughter. I felt that same heartbreak that's eating you away every second of the day. That mental minefield that comes with every waking moment and the monsters that follow you into your dreams. I know what it's like to lose your whole world." Tears had begun to well up in the dark pools of her eyes. I watched the tears silently fall as Danny wrestled with her hand. "I want to help you. I want to help you because I know he won't." My eyes narrowed. I knew what she was. I knew where she came from and what she wanted. And out of everything in that moment, what really scared me was the overwhelming sense of sincerity in her voice. "What do you mean he won't help?" I croaked finally. Even in the haunting bottomless darkness of her eyes, I saw sincere sadness dance across her face. "He never knew how," she whispered. The night I found out the truth was the night I sold my soul. I made her promise to torture the bastard that stole every ounce of happiness away from me. The conditions of the deal were that once I allowed her in, she would be in full control of my body until either we both perished or she was exorcised. She explained that in the event of the latter, although I would be free from her, she wouldn't rest until she found me again. Lastly, she emphasized that my soul would forever be bound to service in hell, that I would be disfigured and my spirit branded unfit for God's compassion and entry into heaven. As far as I was concerned, there was no such thing as his compassion, and hell couldn't be worse than what I had to live through every time I opened my eyes. I agreed and let her loose, and she would go on to honor our agreement to the letter. I watched as that stain on humanity went through every horror the body would physically allow. I watched for the first time as a soul was dragged and broken in hell. From time to time, I still think of it. You're probably thinking it was torture being trapped with a demon in your body, that once you sign yourself over, you're subject to the worst punishment imaginable. You'd be wrong. The reason it's so hard to exorcise a demon from a body isn't because they are fighting to stay. It's because we want them to stay. In exchange for your body, they create a reality where you regain everything you lost. She let me live to see a life that was so unjustly taken. I saw my son grow, and I died a happy man, with my wife alongside me, over and over and over. I never knew suffering while I was there. I never knew pain. She explained to me that those who sought the devil out willingly knew suffering he could never replicate, and that those brave enough to ask for his help would receive it in full, and so much more. That even though God never knew how to help, the devil wouldn't hesitate to try and learn how. The night that priest ripped that demon from my body, God took my life a second time. Ever since then, I've been wandering the streets looking for her, and as I walk those roads, I can hear it. When my soul was freed, I gained something. I don't know if it's an extra sense or something that's always been there. Now I can hear them. In every home, across every alley, and every street all over the world. I hear those desperate prayers for help. Prayers almost identical to the ones I sent as I boiled alive in agony those 2 years ago. The suffering pleas of the world are almost as deafening as the silence that echoes back.